Hey there, my name is Jaden, here for foamarmory, and today we're going to be turning this into this. Check it out.
Today's build is heavily based on a modified Pepicura model generously provided to the shop by the good folks at Urban Props. Pepicura is a free program for papercraft that we can hack into a foam pattern making machine. If you're curious and want to learn more about this process, I host a live stream every Tuesday on the topic. The links to these templates are going to be down below in the description, so feel free to print them out and follow along. The PDF templates are easily printed onto letter-sized paper and assembled using the registration marks in the corners of the pages. I like to leave myself small notes as I get a feel for how I want the pieces to come together. After cutting all the template pieces out, minus the parts for the tubing on the sides of the helmet, I took a moment to organize my patterns by what thickness of foam I intended to use for them. For this build, I'll be using 2mm and 6mm HD foam, as well as some black 8mm foam left over from my one-day Narseal build. I opted to begin with my 8mm pieces, the mouth, ears, cheeks, and center back. I gave myself a little extra room around the ear pieces to sand in a nice bevel and then cut the pieces out with my X-Acto blade. I also used an X-Acto blade to etch lines into the foam and open them up with my heat gun. My rotary tool was also very useful in knocking down some of the edges to give them a more rounded look. The cheeks of this mask, as well as the grill of the mouth, are highly detailed, but with a bit of patience, it's possible to etch in all the detail lines on the pattern pieces clean and square. I also carved 2 V-groove channels on the back of the mouthpiece and then deepened them with my soldering iron. This gives the piece a more subtle angle on the outer face, as you can see here. From there, I moved on to the 6mm parts. These pieces make up the bulk of the mask. I find that 6mm foam works best for most helmets due to its general pliability, but it's still thick enough to carve in a great deal of detail. Virtually every other major piece of this build will be cut from 6mm foam and detailed. Be sure to cut out the cups of the eyes at a fairly sharp angle to get the best shape later on. And for more tips on cutting out 6mm foam, check out our live work sessions on this helmet. With all the pieces cut out, we can transfer our detail and cut lines to the outer and inner faces of the foam respectively. This will help us achieve even more details like the clean lip of the brow as well as the layered panels of the forehead. One of the greatest challenges of this helmet is the vast number of tiny layered pieces of 2mm foam that make up the ribbing on the back of the helmet, not to mention the added details on the faceplate. To achieve this, I had to mark all the guidelines for these pieces onto the 6mm parts and then trace, label, and cut out each one of them in 2mm foam. It's a lot of back and forth between the two thicknesses, but the end result is well worth it. After cutting out all of the 2mm parts, I took a brief pause to detail the pieces at the temples of the helmet. These each have a minor undercut on the inside of the foam, as well as a rounded bevel on the edge that faces the front of the mask. It's subtle variations in layers like these that really sell the final product. Speaking of which, every single piece of ribbing on the back of the mask was tacked down with superglue. I prefer Loctite gel control for, well, its control. You can find affiliate links for all of my materials down below in the video description. Once all of your detail layers are tacked down, feel free to set them aside and take care of the chin piece, which has a recessed sort of diamond shape, as well as a few small undercuts that help it keep a nice, angular shape. With all that done, we can set aside the main body of the helmet and attack the tubing on the sides. The larger pieces of tubing will be fully constructed out of foam for the sake of accuracy. Feel free to follow along with me as I wrestle with the patterns on our live streams. I reduced the part count for each side to just 9 pieces, which, believe me, took some doing, but I'm quite happy with the way the pieces fit together. Again, we're working with a mix of 8, 6, and 2mm foam, so be sure to keep your pieces organized and well labeled. Most of the circles and the top flap of the tubing will be 8mm foam. The wrapped pieces are cut from 6mm foam, and the one layered detail on the flap of the tubing is cut from 2mm foam. I also added a strip of 2mm foam to the inner edge of the bevel on the front of the tubing. Cutting and shaping these pieces was a lot of trial and error for me, so the best advice I can give to you is to be unafraid to cut a new piece if you're not feeling confident. And don't forget the surface details that wrap around the face of the tubing. Those small details really bring the piece to life. After separating the tubing pieces between the left and the right, I pulled out a piece of 1 1/2 inch PVC piping to use for the inner circles of the eyes. I cut 1/2 inch long pieces with my Dremel because this pipe was too big for my PVC cutter, and then I sanded the pieces for an even finish on the edge, both for comfort and aesthetics. After dry fitting the pieces, I took everything outside for gluing with contact cement. Contact cement is great for foam crafting because it offers an instantaneous bond. All it takes is a quick stir to keep the pot from going solid and 2 coats of glue on both pieces you want to join. I spoke at length about gluing this helmet together on yet another live stream, so feel free to check that out. In essence, I approached it from 2 angles, building up the back and the front of the helmet, so that I could glue together the sub-assemblies later. In general, try not to overstretch your 2mm overlays when gluing them to thicker pieces, and take extra care that your edges line up properly when gluing the eye cups into place. They really want to bow out in a funny way, but if you force them into place, they will naturally shape the front end of the mask with the PVC circles. Then, halfway through this video, we got a brand new studio, so I got to finish assembly in there. The tubing on the sides of the mask was actually extremely satisfying to glue together. Then, it's a simple matter of gluing the face of the helmet to the back and sides. Don't worry if you notice any small gaps where the grill of the mouth meets the cheeks. Tubing will cover those very shortly. The foam tube sub-assemblies can then be glued into both sides of the helmet, lining up the back edge and mashing them into place with a whole bunch of contact cement in the front. Again, don't worry about small imperfections here, it's more important that the larger pieces are lining up. For the smaller tubes, I used my PVC cutter to bust up an old plastic coat hanger. These things are cheap and consistent in width, so they're ideal for this kind of work. The plastic is easily bent with my heat gun and a pair of heat-resistant work gloves. Remember, safety first, folks. Before gluing the small tubes into place, I wrapped some thin 2mm strips around them with super glue at various intervals based on my reference photos. I just eyeballed these since they aren't strictly necessary for this build, even if they do look wicked cool. After dry fitting the pipes, I went ahead and hot glued them all into place. Be sure to leave a slight gap between the cheek pieces and the piping on the sides so you can still paint around everything. With a little cleanup from my rotary tool to knock down any offending edges, I busted out my foam clay and a few random parts from my bits bin to smooth over the joints around my tubes and fill in the 6 pieces that go in the recesses of the cheeks. Now is the chance to do any last-minute sanding, drilling, etching, or sculpting that you wanted to add to your piece before we begin the sealing process with a generous coat of matte Mod Podge. Mod Podge is a great primer for foam even when you plan on applying Plastidip because you get to use fewer coats, and it remains quite flexible for some time. Just be careful not to let any drips or runs get away from you because those can be quite difficult to hide. With the Mod Podge all dry, I was able to spray a preliminary coat of gray Plastidip to highlight any imperfections I still wanted to smooth over with Quick Seal silicone caulk. This stuff is great as a flexible, paintable filler, and it bonds very well to Plastidip. As an aside, try not to get any filler on the insides of the eyes. They're already perfectly round pieces of pipe. Once the Quick Seal has fully dried, I applied a coat of matte Rust-Oleum Gray to act as my base coat, and my metallics were finished up in Rub and Buff Silver and Antique Gold. I love wax finishes for their feel as well as their sheen. You can buff them up nice and shiny or grease them up for a grimy, dirty look. I didn't even need to tape off for this paint job. With a steady hand and a sharp brush, the whole thing only took about a half hour to finish up. Using some references, I also applied some additional silver to certain edges to mimic the wear and tear of the screen-used helmet. After admiring my handiwork, I was nearly done. I moved on to the eyes, and for the lenses, I cut up a Dollar Tree plastic clipboard and I lined the insides with white cross-stitch mesh to achieve the subtle grid on the insides of the eyes. Then, hot glue into place. I also hot glued a band of elastic to the inside of the helmet to ensure a snug fit, and with that, the build was finally complete.
This thing is freaking gorgeous. I'm not gonna mince words about this. I think this thing looks great. This build is a hog. It is just chock full of tiny details and little things that are just a joy to discover. The more you look at it, the more there is to really dig into, and that is just so much fun as a prop maker. Big wins. This thing is extremely lightweight and extremely comfortable and breathable somehow. I have no idea why. Big wins. This cross-stitch mesh. The cross-stitch mesh is super easy to see through, and for some reason, I think it's because it's white cross-stitch mesh behind a tinted lens, it has this vague glow to it at all times, and that's fantastic. I learned so much on this build. For instance, PVC and ABS plastic really play well with foam. Contact cement still bonds everything together, and frankly, it all meshes really well together in the end, and that's the important thing. There's not just areas of detail and areas of unique success. This thing looks really nice, and more than that, it looks like Star-Lord's mask. And that's the point, because if it doesn't look like Star-Lord's mask, I mean, why are we even here? Why are we doing this? Somebody tell me. I wanted to give everybody a slightly better look at the elastic band that keeps my head in place here. Basically, all it's doing is gently snugging my cheeks against the inside of that, and it's super comfortable. I can't stress that enough. Honestly, this thing is such an improvement over my last Star-Lord build for so many different reasons. This thing actually has some flex to it. I can sort of squish it around, whereas I really don't dare do that to this piece. Not to mention, I just straight up skipped pieces on this. There's no piping in the inner parts of the mouth there, and the back detail was way less intense. I was admittedly guessing for this build, and to have it confirmed that this is really what it should be looking like, it makes all the difference to me. So here it is, the final product, all finished up. I hope you all at home had a lot of fun building this and watching me build it too. For me, this helmet is really synonymous with all of the things that make prop making and prop building in the MCU movies great. If you like these builds, if you like these videos, please subscribe to the channel. We've almost hit 500 subscribers, and we're gonna be doing a great big giveaway. Huge shout out to Urban Props for the use of his 3D model. Link to his Facebook is gonna be down below in the description. Please check him out. He's a great artist and a tremendous member of the prop making community. I love doing these builds, and if you like these templates, why not get them a week earlier as one of my patrons? Huge shout out to my 4 patrons, Jennifer, Pendulce, Austin of AJ Plays Piano, and of course, K-Snake. You guys make this shop run. And thanks to everybody who participated in our recent patron poll. We're gonna be doing that build this coming week, so stay tuned. If you want to support the channel in other ways, you can check out our Etsy store in the link down below in the description. Or you can like us over on Facebook and Instagram. Join the community, join in the fun. For now, I've been Jaden, here for Foam Armory. Thank you all so much for watching, and take care.